Is A.J. Brown really about to be traded from the Philadelphia Eagles? What's going on with the New York Jets? Robert Saleh's coaching tenure now mired by completely anonymous sources. We're going to get to all that in a little bit. But first, let's get it rolling on Football with Faria.
It's time for Football with Faria.
You got to get the offense right, and you got to be able to be aggressive. They put up 14 against the secondary. That is driving me up a freaking wall right now.
Now here's your host, Nick Faria.
So where do we start? It's Wednesday evening, 5 o'clock. I wish I had a drink in my hand to go over the absolute absurdity of the last 24 hours, because holy hell did it get crazy out there, Jets fans and Eagle fans. We'll throw them in there as well. First off, let's start from the beginning. Happened yesterday, but A.J. Brown is apparently in trade talks between the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, who was the one that came out with that report? Oh, nobody. No one actually came out and said that Philadelphia was looking to trade him. Who came out with it? Well, it was actually Sports Radio WIP, the flagship station of the Philadelphia Eagles. Came out, not with the report, but a couple of hosts suggested that if a trade were to come down with A.J. Brown, that it would make sense to trade him for Patrick Surtain out in Denver. No legitimate reporting. There's been no sources saying that Philadelphia is willing to trade him. He's got a $42 million cap hit going into 2024. He's not getting traded. But this is sports. This is sports radio. We have to increase and create controversy where nothing is found. There is legitimate reporting going on with the New York Jets down in One Jets Drive. There's nothing like that going on in Philadelphia. We have no idea. There's no set reporting based on trade rumors. It's solely based on one host from WIP suggesting that A.J. Brown could get moved for Patrick Surtain, and he should be moved for a player like Patrick Surtain. I don't know. Makes no sense. Makes no sense to me. Again, Football with Faria here. You guys, so appreciative for those of you that are watching. When I get to the Jets in a little bit, just talking about A.J. Brown and the trade rumors that are going on. We're going to have a very quick show. We're going to end right before 6 o'clock so you guys can make it on for Jake Asman's show at 6. If you guys missed it, I was on a show today talking about some of the Jets rumors. If you guys want to help me out, subscribe on YouTube, like this video, subscribe, do whatever you guys need to do. I'm still not getting used to the call to actions. But yeah, call in, ask a comment. We'll get to all of that in a little bit. But how about the stuff for the Jets today? A report coming out from The Athletic stating that Robert Saleh, Aaron Rodgers, the coaching staff, it's all bad with the Jets. It's all bad. Every single one of it. The Athletic report coming out from Zach Rosenblatt and Diana Rossini essentially cited that the coaching staff did not do its due diligence throughout the entirety of the 2023 season, did not do its due diligence in preparing for the 2023 season, even with Aaron Rodgers. And of course, on top of that, Aaron Rodgers is too involved in the organization, according to some. Now, Rosenblatt and Diana Rossini did say that they interviewed close to 30 people within and outside the organization. And these are very credible reporters. Guys, Diana Rossini's been at ESPN. Zach Rosenblatt's been at The Athletic forever. These are two highly reputable people within the sports journalism industry. And before I get to anything about it, I want to say from the beginning that I don't think, and I will be very confident to say they aren't, but Rossini and Rosenblatt are not lying. This is not something that they just cooked up. They've been working on this for a while. Most of these stories like this, they take a while because you want to make sure every source is correct. It's the 3-source rule you learn in college. You make sure your story is correct. So before I get to any of this, before we talk about questions, before you guys call in, I'm a reporter. I write for Sports Illustrated. I'm working for Pro Football Network, both on the side. But at the same time, I'm not going to take people complaining about a report like this, about the actual validity of a report like this, because it's not fair to them, because they've done their job. We can argue about some of the finer points of the article, who said what, why was this said, but we're not going to question the validity of this. We're not going to, and I'm not going to allow it. Sorry. I'm not the kind of guy that's going to stir the pot just for everyone's amusement. It's not going to happen. It was a well-written piece, and it deserves to be treated as the truth, because these are guys, these are reporters that have done this far longer than I have. I graduated college in 2019. When I graduated college, Rosenblatt was already a reporter for Philadelphia. Diana Rossini was already at ESPN. I am brand new to this. Brand new. So I'm not going to sit here and try to question that. What I will say, and we're going to go through this step by step. We're going to talk about what it means for ownership. We're going to talk about what it means for the general manager, for the head coach, for the roster, for the entire coaching staff. And we can start with the locker room, because I'll tell you what, Aaron Rodgers is a lot of different things. You can argue about him off the field and his vaccine status and whatever he does off it, whatever he says off it. Personally, and I've said it on this show, I would like my quarterback to be a little bit more quiet. Just, you don't need to say what you think at all times. However, when there's a quarterback who's a 4-time NFL MVP, who has won a Super Bowl, who is going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame when he retires, he has every right to say what he wants to say. We have every right to ignore it. That's how I think it should go. That's not how it's not going, but that's how I think it should go. So Aaron Rodgers being involved in the New York Jets organization as much as he is, and based on the report from The Athletic, they essentially said that Aaron Rodgers is now the GM. And Joe Douglas is the assistant GM, essentially making fun of Douglas that he lost power to the starting quarterback. And the one thing I'll say to that is, very simply, so what? So what? You look at every team in the National Football League with a franchise quarterback. You don't think the quarterback has any say in roster decisions? You don't think that's the case? You don't think that Tom Brady had roster discipline and was able to choose which players he wanted when he went to Tampa Bay or Peyton Manning in Denver? This is how it happens. This is what you do. When you want a franchise quarterback and you don't draft him right away and you pick one up, you give him the farm. This is Aaron Rodgers' team. Aaron Rodgers' hands need to be all over this organization because he's the only one that's consistently won in the last decade. You trust that with him on the field, you will win. And most likely you will, because he's still a great quarterback. You still have a top 5 defense. You still have solid pass rushers and solid receivers and starter runners. This is a good team that has just been decimated with injuries and a little bit of dysfunction. I say little, probably a lot of dysfunction if this is coming out now. But for the roster itself, this isn't going to mean much at all, because this really, you read the Athletics report, and this really talks about the coaching staff and the front office, and this is where I'm going to get to now. There is an internal tug of war of who gets the most blame. A tug of war between Joe Douglas's front office and Robert Saleh's coaching staff. And the sad thing is, there's only one group pushing right now, and that's Joe Douglas. When you have a report like this come out, and again, I am not questioning the validity of the report, but we can use our context clues, guys. We can use our context clues and say a report like this coming out where the majority of the report is talking about the deficiencies of Robert Saleh's coaching staff, his in-game management, his off-the-field management of the organization, when something like that happens, and it's being talked about in a public setting like this, that's not a leak from the coaching staff, or it usually isn't. That's usually a sign of a front office, someone in the front office trying to save their job, trying to save their legacy. And I'm not saying Douglas is the leak. From the conversations that I have heard, Douglas and the recently departed Hogan are gone. They're not part of this. But there could be someone within their camp spreading that out and making sure that they don't get the chief blame in this. At least what happened in 2023. But I will say, and you Jet fans, chime in when you want, but I will say that Joe Douglas and his front office, to me, share more blame than anyone else from what happened this season. When you look at the blame, and I kind of put it in tiers. You put blame out for a Jets season like this, and I think the tiers is the top tier is injuries, because you can't plan for injuries. You can't plan for the amount that they had. And then you have the front office for not being able to produce at a high level, get the players you need when the injuries happen. That's a problem to me. And that's number 2 on the list. We got a call here from Alan. Alan, thanks so much.
What's going on, Nick? How are you? Great to see you have your own show. I loved your platform during the Jake show, and I'm glad to hear you every day. Couple of comments, one on a topic you brought up yesterday and one on Robert Saleh. First of all, on a topic you brought up yesterday, and that was the 10th pick and the opportunity for the Jets to maybe go up and get one of the 2 left tackles. I couldn't agree with you more. I know the flavor of the day is Taliesin Fuaga, and he'd make a great right tackle. But again, the opportunity to get one of the 2 left tackles and play them there for 12 years is just so appealing to me. And again, if Atlanta has that 8th pick and one of those 2 guys are there, you have to make the call. It's imperative. Again, I'm an Alt guy. I would love Alt. I hope we can get up and go get him. I don't think he gets past 7 in Tennessee. But again, I've watched Fashanu for the last couple of years. He's a tremendous pass pro guy. I know he needs to work a little bit more on his run protection, but he's a guy that I think could be a staple as a left tackle for the next 12 years. So I definitely agreed with your take yesterday.
I appreciate it. I agree. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward when you have a draft and you have 2 top tackles like this.
Totally agree. And as far as Robert Saleh is concerned, and you know that I'm not a fan of his at all, okay? Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I thought he should have gotten fired this year. I read the piece by Zach. I heard his take on his show today about an hour ago. The meat of the article is an indictment of a coach that worries about his perception outside. He's a guy that I think he reads a lot of press clippings. He's a guy that is worried about what people think of him. And to me, that's not a head coach. To me, that's a guy that I believe is worried about his own self-esteem. Again, I was bothered about Saleh last year when he brought up the whole receipts comment. To me, that's a comment to me showing a coach which lacks self-esteem. I want a confident coach. I don't mind if my coach is a little bit of a dick. I don't care, okay? I want a coach who's confident. And to me, in some situations this year when their team struggled, you looked at him on the sideline and there was that blank stare there. And to me, I think he thinks too much, and I don't think he has a lot of confidence in himself as a head coach. And again, I like when people say, oh, he's a great defensive mind. Okay, he could be a defensive coordinator. That's fine. That's his forte. To be a head coach, you have to be a different person. And I just don't see him as that guy. I never will. I think he might need to go back to the drawing board next year, maybe go back and be a DC for 5 more years and learn what it means to be a head coach. Because in my opinion, I think he's on borrowed time. I think he's gone next year. I really do. I don't think he's the right guy. I know that they're going to bank on Aaron Rodgers to come back and have a huge year. But again, this regime, starting with Saleh and looking up with Douglas, I just don't think we have the right regime to lead this team. I just don't.
I appreciate the call, Alan. Thank you for that. And the one thing that I'll say, I don't disagree with anything Alan said. I don't disagree with a single thing he said, particularly when it comes to Robert Saleh being a good guy. Robert Saleh is a great man. Great men aren't always the best head coaches. Now, do I disagree with Alan in that I think he can turn it around this year? Absolutely. Because when you have Aaron Rodgers, a lot of things change. This roster is very good with a starting quarterback as good as Aaron Rodgers. So I think he could turn it around. But a lot of stuff has to happen. And I do agree. The stuff with Joe Benigno was just baffling. Absolutely baffling. The stuff that he has said, baffling. And it's really a sign, and I don't disagree with Alan at all. It's a sign of a guy that's not confident in what he is talking about, what he's doing as part of this organization. And I think that has to do a lot with the first couple of years and this being a part of this regime. Losing right away, not being able to turn it around right away. I think that had a profound effect on him. So much so that when he got Aaron Rodgers and lost him 4 plays in, I think the confidence of the team was shot. And they were kind of coached that way too. That was kind of part of the Rosenblatt athletic piece where they talked about the fact that it didn't seem that offensive staff was really prepared and didn't really care to prepare for the post-Rodgers life. I don't disagree with that. We all saw it. We all kind of saw these issues. And when you add that in with a head coach that's trying to keep a locker room together, and the one thing that I'll say to defend Saleh is the locker room is still behind him. Sauce Gardner said it. Aaron Rodgers has said it. There's a lot of guys still in defense of Robert Saleh, and that is the reason why you keep him around. But if they don't start off, I said this on Jake Asman's show today, if they don't start off 4-1, 5-0, he's a goner. He's a goner. They have to start off like the best team in football next year to show our improvements on offense are right where we need to be. We just needed a franchise quarterback. Everything else has taken care of itself. Everything else. And that's part of the problem. Because when you have a great team like this and you draft a quarterback in the second with the second overall pick and he doesn't pan out, you have to get desperate. You have to be able to do a lot of different things. And the fact of the matter is, in 2023, the expectation was that Zach Wilson was not going to see the field this year. It was going to be Aaron Rodgers, a backup quarterback, and Aaron Rodgers was going to play all 17 games. And the problem that I have is the fact that when Rodgers went down, and this is not a Robert Saleh problem. To me, and again, I've said this already today, Robert Saleh is not the problem. Even post this article, Robert Saleh is not the biggest problem the Jets have right now. The biggest problem is the front office did nothing. They did nothing when Corey Davis retired. They essentially said, we're going to trust our rookie, undrafted free agent wide receivers. And it blew up in their face almost immediately. Almost immediately it blew up in their face. Aaron Rodgers went down. It took them 2.5, 3 weeks to bring in Trevor Siemian. They didn't bring in Carson Wentz, who has higher upside. They didn't trade for one of the backup quarterbacks still available. And the way things were, we talk about hindsight is 2020. Of course, hindsight is 2020. But they were 4-3 going into the bye week. 4-3. That is a sign of a team that could compete for a playoff spot if you had solid quarterback play. If they had beaten the Patriots like they were supposed to do, And Zach Wilson did not have a bad game. They win that game. Now you're not talking 4-3. You're talking 5-2. That's not Robert Saleh's fault. That's Joe Douglas's fault. That's the front office's fault for not being prepared, for not being aggressive. That's my biggest problem here. And listen, the report is completely accurate. I will trust the reporters. But the fact of the matter is, this screams more like someone trying to protect their job than actually making it seem like everyone's against Robert Saleh. We got another call here with Johnny. Johnny, how's everything going?
Going on, Nick? Hey, man, appreciate you doing this, dude. Just like what Alan was saying, man, your segment on the show was one of my favorites because of the insight that you bring and the fact that you're actually you're a fan from another team, but you kind of like get yourself away from that and you speak some truth on that. So I appreciate it, man. But the whole stuff that's going on over there, man, it's not surprising, man, because I feel like everything in New York it's a lot bigger and it gets blown out a lot bigger as well. So like it just comes with the territory. I definitely agree with you that I don't believe Saleh has lost the locker, but he's on a super tight leash because just like you said, if they do not start hot in the very beginning, we could have a mutiny on our hands. Like literally that could happen over there and I could see it happening. Unfortunately, I think that he never wanted Zach Wilson. I think those reports were real. He kind of said it in one of the press conferences. I feel like Saleh is one of those individuals like you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper to understand what he's saying. He's never going to show his full cards and let you know what the true inside of what's in his mind going on. But yeah, I mean, I see a lot of people give him a whole bunch of crap on the sidelines that he's not animated, he's not this, he's not all of that. But I feel like it's just the cameras zoom in on him at the worst times. Because I've had friends that have gone to the games, I've gone to games, and that dude's a maniac on there, walking down back and forth, flipping out and stuff. So, you know, I feel like he deserves to have at least 1 year, right, with a good, competent quarterback. And then from that point, we truly grade him to see if he can be a head coach in the because once Aaron went down, dude, I was not expecting us to win a lot of games anymore. And the fact that we squeezed out 7, that to me right then and there is like, okay, he's not that bad of a head coach. You know, I put more blame on JD, right, than anything for not bringing in another backup quarterback to go ahead. Because look, I really feel like if we had like a Tyrod Taylor in here, a couple of these games we would have won.
Taylor's a great point. I agree.
Instead of having Boyle here, where my wife, an individual that doesn't know football that well, right? She's like, that guy's arm is horrible, you know. So I was one of the guys that I pushed for Joe Flacco. Everybody thought I was nuts, and I was like, he would do just enough to get us over some wins, and I mean, at least to get us maybe into that 9 and 10 spectrum. Couple games that I think he could have squeezed out. You know, I know it's crazy me saying that and whatnot, but I guess what I'm trying to say is just if we had a true vet quarterback,
I get your point. Yeah,
it would have been a difference. And that's why this offseason is, to me, as a Jet fan, because last season was a super, super, super tough season. I mean, it's probably one of the worst seasons I've ever had to witness because how much emotion was invested in it. I feel like this offseason, it has to be a W. There can't be no mess up. So I'm glad that they're trimming some of the fat. And it's intriguing to see who's the people that are leaking these things out, if that is the case. Because doesn't it feel kind of like a little bit on some like mobbish type of thing? And, you know, Saleh is on the head of the table over there.
And this is kind of what I was saying earlier on the program and earlier on Jake's show. When you have these anonymous sources come out, it's usually a sign of someone trying to save their job or trying to save their legacy. And the one thing, and Johnny, do you have any other points before I roll through?
Other than that, no. I mean, kind of to where Alan was talking a little bit earlier about, I was a big Bowers fan, right? But I know that that's more of a luxury than a truly a need. But out of all the tackles that are there, other than Alt, which I think is going to be a stud, I was huge on Fuaga just because of the way he moves his feet, and he was a wrestler back in high school. I love tackles that are wrestlers because they know how to use their hands, right? And some of the stuff that they say he can't do yet in the NFL is stuff that he could learn. So that's my take on that. But I appreciate you, man. But yeah, let me know what you think about what I was saying.
Yeah,
Appreciate
absolutely.
you, man.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Again, football with Faria here. We're going to be on for another 20, 25-ish minutes. You guys got to call in. You got the link in some of the comments there. We also have the link in the description on YouTube. Like, comment, share, whatever you guys want to do. Subscribe. It's all appreciated. But based on Johnny's point, I will say, no, Joe Flacco is not walking in there and they're not winning 9-10 games. If they were going to win with a backup quarterback, you needed to have the backup quarterback that could scramble, that could run outside the pocket, make things happen out of nothing, because the offensive line was just decimated. They were just decimated. And Flacco would have been killed. He's not a mobile guy. He never was. He was on his last legs. And the one thing, again, based on Johnny's point, when you have these sources, these anonymous sources, it's all about protecting a legacy. And I said this on Jake's show, I'll say it again. With the Philadelphia Eagles, Howie Roseman is a master at this. A master at this. Because remember, how many times has he been around for new coaches in Philadelphia? You want to talk about GMs not being able to survive some of their coaching hires? Look at what Howie Roseman is in Philadelphia. He has survived the following: Andy Reid, Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson, and Nick Sirianni. He survived all of it. All of it. Because what he does is, it's a masterful stroke. What he does is, he does everything he can to build the team into a championship contender. And when they don't do it, his team starts feeding to the media these different reports. Coaches aren't exactly doing the right thing. The play calling's not exactly right. The players aren't exactly right. All of that isn't exactly right. It's masterful. Because when you look at it, you say, well, Roseman's done his job. And I agree. Listen, Howie Roseman might be the biggest dick on the planet. People have said he's an absolute dick as a general manager. But he is the best in football. There's no one in the NFL right now that is able to destroy and rebuild a roster as well and as quick as Howie Roseman. And the thing is, and this is kind of why I draw that comparison, Joe Douglas was a Howie Roseman disciple. So when this kind of thing comes out, the first thing I thought of was, this is not coming from the coaching staff. This is not coming from the locker room. This isn't even coming from Woody Johnson. This is coming from the general manager's camp. 100%. And again, this isn't to say that Joe Douglas is the one that was part of the 30 sources that Diana Rossini and Zach Rosenblatt came out with. That's not what I'm saying. But when this kind of thing comes out and the general manager gets maybe 2 lines in the story, should tell you all you need to know. Someone's protecting his job. Someone's protecting the legacy. And it's not Robert Saleh. And again, I love Johnny's take on Saleh being the rah-rah guy, because I do agree. The hard part as a head coach is your face is always going to be shown in good and bad times. When a bad play happens, they're going to put a close-up on your face. When good things happen, they're going to put a close-up on your face. We all look at the times where he's been quiet and reserved when the Jets are losing. But we kind of ignored the game-winning punt return by Xavier Gibson on opening night. You know who was one of the first people to reach him? Robert Saleh. He's an energetic guy. It's just hard to be energetic for a team that doesn't have their franchise quarterback, is on their 13th different offensive line, and the offense is essentially given up. Part of the problem. Part of the problem. And do I think these are fixed? Do I think these are fixable things? Absolutely. And you're kind of seeing that now, right? As part of the report from The Athletic, Robert Saleh was mentioned saying that he's looking for another offensive mind to work with Nathaniel Hackett. And if that's the case, and if they end up finding someone, Jet fans should commend Robert Saleh. They should. Because that's essentially saying, I know we weren't good enough. I'm not going to let Aaron go without his number one guy, but I do want to get some new ideas in there. I do want to figure out a plan to fix this in case this happens again. That's all part of it. And it's really well done. If they're able to find somebody from a Shanahan tree or a McVay tree, that's damn good. And that's how you solve offensive problems. So I will commend them for that. And again, it's his birthday. I'm not sitting here saying that he's the worst coach on the face of the planet, because he's not. He's not. Sorry. He's been dealt a terrible hand to start his coaching career. A terrible hand. And he has some fault in that as well. His team has not been prepared when they've needed to be prepared. But like I said, if we're talking about the pyramid of blame for 2023, Robert Saleh is not at the top tier. I would argue he's not even the top 3 tiers. It's just not the case. We'll get to some of your comments here. I see a lot of comments here. Appreciate all you guys that are still on. You guys got a call, like I said, in the description on YouTube. From Franco, we can't find a GM and a coach this late in the process. Firing everyone would go well for Rodgers. I agree. You have Aaron Rodgers for at least 1 more year, maybe 2. You roll with what we got. Jets takeoff. Let's say there are 30. Are there 30 people in the front office? So I know there was some jokes earlier today about the Athletic sourcing 30 people, both inside and outside the Jets organization. Yes, there are more than 30 people in the front office. Most analytical teams are about, what, 15, 20, sometimes 30 of themselves. That's just the analytics department. That's not talking about the hundreds of scouts in college. They all have a region. They all have schools. They have scouts for each particular school. The front offices are massive, especially now. Especially now. It's just how it is. Hawk, Aaron Rodgers saves everyone's assets and make Saleh good or Hackett good. They both have been exposed. Well, Hawk, I'll ask you this, and I will preface this by saying Robert Saleh looking at this is a terrible look. But I can look it up because I'm a reporter. I'm a host. I can say these things because I'm not a head coach. He can't do it because it just looks bad. But how many head coaches in professional football are successful when you don't have your franchise quarterback? When you don't have your starting offensive line and you're on your 3rd different complete group, 13 different offensive linemen. Very few are successful like that. Very few. And again, part of the report, Saleh looking it up, absolutely terrible. It's a terrible look. But at the same time, I get it. They're all trying to protect their jobs. You would too in this situation. I get it. From Lake Jet fan, how does the staff not watch game tape during team meetings? Shows lack of accountability from offensive staff and Saleh not knowing what the hell is going on in the building. So I'll say this. Based on that report and talking about the tapes and everything else, I think this is why he wants, and I say he meaning Saleh, wants an offensive mind to help game plan with Nathaniel Hackett. Because I truly believe, and based on the report, it seems that way. You can infer whatever you want, but it certainly seems that Nathaniel Hackett gave up and just didn't want to really go all in on this season when Aaron Rodgers was lost for the year. And again, blame Saleh for hiring him in the first place. I get it. But you can't blame him for Aaron Rodgers going down. We can blame him for the lack of accountability, but even then, there is accountability. We hear the players all the time. They have his back. The problem that I have is if you're not going to make any changes offensively, you're essentially banking on Rodgers playing a full 17 games. You better have your backup quarterback. You better have a number 2 wide receiver, and you better fix that offensive line. Because if all 3 of those questions are not answered, you are essentially running it back with the same football team and the same problems and the same concerns. And that's not fair to Jet fans. That's not fair to the roster. That's not fair to the coaching staff. Because you're setting them up for failure. Those are some big-time problems and needs that need to be resolved. From Hawk again, Hackett thought he was going to come in and take a check to sit back and do nothing while Aaron does all the work per usual, but then 4 plays in, need to scheme an offense now. So listen, I understand that people will look at this and say, well, Hackett just gave up and yada, yada. What essentially they did was they cut back the offensive game plans. They cut back the schematics of the offense to better fit Zach Wilson so he's not overwhelmed. The problem is having Zach Wilson be the number 2 going into a season and not developing the talent around him. They should have had him rolling out of the pocket every snap. They didn't. And you saw he was just very uncomfortable because of it. So yes, Nathaniel Hackett is part of the blame structure. But why would you go back to Zach Wilson in the first place? That's not smart. That's not roster building. Going through all the comments. From Hal, if Niners win 11 days and Jets visit Sunday Night Football, we want so much pressure on this regime there. So, first off, if you're the NFL and the San Francisco 49ers have just won the Super Bowl, why in God's name do you want the Jets as the first game? You want a team that can actually play and you know is going to give a good game. Playoff matchups. I don't know if the 49ers play the Packers or the Lions or the Cowboys. I think they do play the Cowboys. But that makes sense. Not the Jets. That's not going to happen. Going through everybody's comments here. What'd you guys think of Hogan leaving the Jets organization, parting ways with the Jets? I know a lot of people were concerned and sort of putting 2 and 2 together and saying that Hogan was the leak. But like I said, the people that I've spoken to, Hogan is not part of any report like that. At least that the people that I've spoken to, he is not part of it. Because think about it, he's a well-respected guy. He was a part of a draft class. He was part of a scouting process that put forth one of the greatest draft capital on the planet. The job that they did in 2022 was incredible. That's the kind of job that gives you a second job when you get fired and you fail down the stretch. That's just what it is. And again, I know a lot of people, and Hogan, yes, comment here from Johnny. He blames him for Zach Wilson. And yes, that is a very fair point. When you guys miss on a quarterback that high, it will stay with you for your entire career. 100%. But the one thing I will say, again, there's always the extreme positive and the extreme negative. The one thing that I'll say to bring this back down to the middle, with them missing on Zach Wilson so bad, this should have set the Jets back another 5 years. It should have. But it didn't. Why? Because they had an unbelievable draft class. They knocked it out of the park with Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, Breece Hall, Max Mitchell, Clemens. We're talking about players in the later parts of the draft that were just solid, average starters at best. Average starters at best. And that's why you get the second chance in the mulligan with Aaron Rodgers. Because this team, listen, if Zach Wilson played like this, and the team around him was bad, kind of like Sam Darnold, you don't get an opportunity. You don't get another chance to fix the quarterback question. You just don't. It never happens for most GMs. But because the roster is ready to win now, that is a feather in the cap of the front office. It is. It's just essentially what it is. Zach was all on the GM from Hader, just like Wentz in Philly and Lance in San Francisco. And you know the difference. And I'm glad this comment is here for you guys watching. We're going to be on for another 10 minutes. So get your calls in, get your questions in now. I'm glad this question's here. Wentz in Philadelphia, they traded up for him. And it blew up in their face in 2020. Blew up in their face. They went 4-11-1 and were the worst team in football. And the general manager's still here. Trey Lance, they traded up for him. And it blew up in their face. And the GM's still there. Why? Because the team around the quarterback was always stacked. The Eagles are not going to get rid of Howie Roseman if they fire Nick Sirianni next year. It's just not going to happen. It's just not. This is what it is. And the fact that this front office has stayed for another year is a sign and a clear example of the coaching staff and the ownership knowing that you don't have drafts like 2022. They just don't happen. And that's the difference here. That's the difference. You want to talk about Joe Douglas and all the problems he had. And yes, it was terrible. Terrible what happened this year. They still have all pros at every level of the defense. They still have a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver, a Pro Bowl caliber running back, 2 offensive linemen that you can build around. You obviously need to go all in on tackles. But you have a franchise quarterback. There's very few teams that have this kind of problem, guys. Here's an interesting debate from Hawk. Johnny, if we could go back and keep Sam Darnold, I would. Team would have ended up better with him than trying to coach up a rookie quarterback. It's interesting, and I'll leave that comment up for those that are there. It's interesting that everyone says that, because I don't know if I fully agree with that sentiment. Because, yes, Sam Darnold is a pocket passing quarterback. He's not the scrambler that Zach Wilson is. He's far more structured. Far more structured. But at the same time, is he really taking this Jets team to the playoffs? He was in games this year for the San Francisco 49ers. He had a chance to start with the Carolina Panthers. And I know the Panthers aren't that good. I understand that. But he's had chances with San Francisco this year. He hasn't exactly looked like a world beater. Not so much. I don't think it's a guarantee that the Jets would have been more successful this year with Sam Darnold. Because as a pocket passer, you need your offensive line to block for you. You need it. And they didn't. So I don't know if Sam Darnold would have helped everything. I don't think Joe Flacco would have helped everything. I just don't. There's so many other issues on this team this year outside of just the quarterback. From Scott Foster, he's smarter than Wilson. Yes, he is a better quarterback than Zach Wilson. He is. But Wilson's skill set, I think, in a little bit of ways, helped the Jets at times on offense because he could get out of trouble when he was allowed to scramble, when he decided to scramble. That's my point there. They were 7-10 this year. Maybe they're 8. What was it? 9-8 with 8-9 without him. That's my issue with that. Because all the tape that I've seen from Sam Darnold is not a guy that can go in there and win football games for you. He didn't do that with San Francisco this year. He didn't. That's part of my issue with that. That's part of the Darnold, Wilson. They were in trouble no matter what. No matter what, they were in trouble when Aaron Rodgers went down. And part of the problem that I have, and going back to this to close this out, is very simply Joe Douglas needed to do more this offseason. And he better make sure this offseason is fixed. They need a number 2 wide receiver. They need 2 tackles. They need to make sure the backup quarterback is situated. Unless that changes, Robert Saleh is a dead man walking, because they're not going to be as competitive as we want, as Jet fans want in 2024. It's just not going to happen. It's just not. This report today, the bombshell report about the deficiencies of Robert Saleh, to me, paint a picture of a front office that is trying to save face, trying to save their jobs in light of their owner. Not about the issues with the coaching staff. Most of this stuff, and I agreed with Jake Asman when we talked about it today, most of this stuff we already knew. We already knew that Nathaniel Hackett was using some very bare offensive systems, and it didn't make sense for most of the season. We knew that Robert Saleh was a guy that had his players back, and at times could be considered soft because of that. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to get into if a coach that was fired is trying to talk badly about the current regime. I'm just not going to give it much stock into it. I'm just not. But some stuff from the front office, absolutely. Absolutely. It's part of the problem. If you can't solve the conversations in the front office, and the front office is leaking stuff to the press, that's not a coaching issue. That's a front office issue. One final comment here from Franco. Is it possible Rodgers knew this report was coming out? Explains why he went on the McAfee show calling out the organization saying he needs to stop these chicken shit leaks. Rodgers' comment was more about Zach Wilson and protecting Zach Wilson. It's essentially saying, no, Zach was not asking for his way out. Stop patronizing the poor kid. He's in a terrible situation. Enough. This isn't about that. But it certainly looks bad that Aaron Rodgers potentially said enough with the leaks, and this massive one comes out. Massive leak. Because it looks bad on everybody. It looks bad on Aaron Rodgers for being too invested. It looks bad on Robert Saleh for not having complete control. Nathaniel Hackett looks terrible. The only one who doesn't really look terrible is Joe Douglas. Because he's not mentioned in all of it. And he should shoulder most of the blame. You didn't address Corey Davis. You didn't address Aaron Rodgers. You didn't address the offensive line. It's just not possible to win as a coaching staff when you have deficiencies at quarterback, at wide receiver, and on the offensive line. It's impossible to win like that. And that goes on the front office for not putting the team in the best position to succeed. Because they didn't. They simply didn't. So if there's one takeaway today, Jets fans, that I want you guys to think about, first off, recognize one thing. Legitimate reporting is necessary. And I say legitimate reporting. Why? Because as I said early on in this show, A.J. Brown is apparently on the trade block. It hasn't been confirmed by any legitimate news source. No one has said that he's on the trade block, but WIP put out a suggestion. They suggested that A.J. Brown be traded to the Denver Broncos for Patrick Surtain. No validity to it. Just, hey, let's throw this out there. See if we can get people talking about it. And they ate it up. And A.J. Brown ate it up. So the legitimate reporting that Rosenblatt and Rossini did today was excellent. Excellent. No questions about it. The question now is, who was the leak? Who's the problem in the organization that continues to leak stuff? Because as that continues to happen, and that happens every single time they lose a game, you are going to have a dead man walking as a coaching staff. It's just how it is. So for all you guys out there watching today, I thank you guys so much for joining. Again, we'll be on tomorrow with our film session on the Dallas Cowboys game. We'll break down the first half, and then I have to teach a class. So it's going to be a pretty busy day for me. Appreciate all you guys jumping on today. We'll see you all tomorrow. For those of you that can't make it, subscribe to the channel, like our videos. It's all appreciated. I have no idea what the full call to action is now on YouTube anymore, but I appreciate it all just the same. Hope you guys have a great night, and I'll see you all tomorrow.